My disability doesn't handicap me. Society does. Powerful words from disability rights activist and international leader Judy Heumann. You know, July is a month filled with so many summer and fun-filled expectations. And for so many, it is a month that remembers one of the most monumental movements that forced into law what we now know as the Americans with Disabilities Act. Today we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the ADA. People with disabilities proved that there was a system that considered them less than equal, that didn't treat them as citizens and marginalized them from opportunities and freedoms. The actions and efforts of the disability community, past and present, changed the world. The Netflix documentary Crip Camp shows exactly how the disability community mobilized to change the course of the future. For able-bodied folks like me, it's important that we take the time to listen from the people who can tell you why the ADA matters and why following through and enforcement of this law is critical to an inclusive and accessible community.
The ADA means access to me. Being able to access the community like people without disabilities do. I can go out to restaurants, go to community events, see a movie, or do simple things like buy groceries at the supermarket. When I visit new places, I know there will be accessibility to some degree because of the ADA.
So as someone with congenital cerebral palsy, the ADA means to me, it represents progress. It's crazy to think that 30 years ago, I wouldn't be able to have the same freedoms I do right now.
For me, as a person with a disability, the ADA means the world to me. It is my civil rights. It is the protections and laws that keep me and everybody with a disability safe.
The Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law on July 26, 1990 by President George H.W. Bush. The ADA is one of America's most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation. It prohibits discrimination, requires reasonable accommodation, and guarantees for people with disabilities the same opportunities as everyone else to participate in the mainstream of American life. Modeled after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the ADA is an equal opportunity law for people with disabilities.
Deinstitutionalization. The roots of the ADA can be traced to a movement of people committed to getting people with mental and physical disabilities out of institutions like nursing homes or residential settings that stripped people of their dignity and worth. This included the return of Vietnam veterans who were disabled. Education, another area. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, passed in 1975, which required that public education be accessible to students with disabilities. While disabled folks fought for their rights and liberties, so were African and Black Americans in the civil rights movement. People with varying disabilities created a nationwide push for civil rights for people with disabilities. The first independent living center was birthed out of this movement, and it played a key role, along with other disability advocacy organizations and individuals willing to stand with the disability community and demand equal rights under the law.
As a person with a disability, to me, the ADA means freedom. It means independence, as it outlines the services, supports, and requirements those of us with disabilities may need to live life on our terms.
It doesn't mean that discrimination against people with disabilities has ended. It doesn't mean that we have our freedom, but it does mean that we have an incredible tool that our ancestors fought for.
The ADA is the result of tens of thousands of people who made up the disability rights movement. People who had worked for years organizing and attending protests, writing letters, drafting legislation, speaking, lobbying, litigating, and even being arrested, doing whatever they could for a cause they believed in. There's no question that without the advocacy of people with disabilities and the rights movement they formed, there would be no ADA. The underlying principle of the ADA was to extend the basic civil rights protections extended to minorities and women to people with disabilities. By 1990, it was clear to Congress that despite over 30 states enacting non-discrimination laws, people with disabilities needed additional protection.
It became even more important for disability right advocates to mobilize, especially when you had businesses writing to members of Congress who complained that the ADA was a nuisance, an expensive headache, and a waste of time and money. Imagine how people with disabilities felt, like an expensive headache, when all they really wanted was to enjoy the freedoms of access that we all take for granted. The disability community pressed on and never wavered.
On July 26, 1990, the ADA was signed into law by President Bush. I was on the lawn of the White House in the crowd watching George Bush sign the ADA. He said, "Let the great wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down." It was a remarkable event. Hundreds of people with disabilities on the lawn cheered as Reverend Harold Wilkie approached the president to get a souvenir pen that he just used to sign the act. Reverend Wilkie was a bilateral amputee at the shoulder. He had no arms. In a move so adroit that if you blinked, you might have missed it, but no one blinked. He slipped off his shoe, grabbed the pen with his foot, and demonstrated that given opportunity, people with disabilities can be successful. For the first time in the history of our country, people with disabilities would no longer be out of sight and out of mind. From a civil rights perspective, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a codification of simple justice.
The simple premise, as so eloquently said by Elise Roy, if you design for people with disabilities first, everyone benefits. Think about it. If today a person who uses a wheelchair couldn't enter a shopping mall or a hospital, it would make it difficult for them to live an independent life. Accessing these facilities is easier for all of us with ramps, wide hallways, automatic doors, etc. because of the ADA. Or think about the person with cerebral palsy who would have been denied a job off the bat because he might be seen as incapable when they might very well possess the skills necessary to do the job. And while today we still wrestle with the quiet prejudice of low expectations against the disability community, including those with unseen disabilities, the ADA did lay a foundation for what is needed to offer our citizens, people with disabilities, and everyone else a community free of debilitating barriers and a chance at opportunities.
The American Disabilities Act has given me freedom. Like they say, disability is not the problem, accessibility is, and it certainly has done that for me. Also, what I would like to see changed is that the complete package is done. For example, if a hotel room is built that's accessible, wonderful, but a heavy door that you can't access it creates a big challenge for many of us.
I want to see universal design applied everywhere because I'm so tired of being an afterthought. I want to be included from the start, just as it should be.
Why is the ADA important? Because it benefits all people. So as we remember and celebrate the 30 years since this law passed, we can honor it and the people who fought so hard to get the ADA passed by working together to continue to make our communities fully accessible, both physically and socially. After all, it's not a person's disability that handicaps them. Society does.
I'm an American living with a physical disability since childhood. I've lived a very full life, and that would not have been possible without the access and opportunities afforded to me due to the Americans with Disabilities Act.
With the passage of the ADA in 1990, it made accessibility a requirement and not an option, expanding our freedoms to go wherever we want. So let's continue to expand on the Americans with Disabilities Act for the next 30 years and beyond.
Bridge's mission is to provide advocacy and leadership towards an accessible, integrated community, promoting health and autonomy for people with disabilities. Bridges offers various programs and services for the community. Thank you for watching today and honoring the ADA by supporting an accessible, inclusive community where everyone wins.